There's always that strange lag time in the beginning. All right. Hi, Huggers. Today we're going to be talking about scale of analysis, and the locusts are really loud in my backyard right now. But anyway, scale of analysis is one of those concepts in human geography that is a little bit challenging. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to try not to go on and on in this video, but I really want to take my time and make sure that I am clearly explaining scale, because there are several different ways that you can look at scale in this class, and it is important that you can distinguish between those different kinds of scales. And so if you have questions while I'm going through this, it might be a really good idea for you to jot them down. At our next synchronous session, we're going to do some practice with this, and I'm going to go over it again just to make sure that everybody understands it. This one causes kids and teachers actually too quite a bit of challenge, but I can help. Okay, so the two learning objectives that you should be able to demonstrate your learning after we're done with this presentation, or maybe after the next couple of days, you need to be able to define scales of analysis used by geographers. We'll talk about that. And you need to explain what scales of analysis reveal. And that's actually the really fun part about this learning target. This first part can be a little bit more of a challenge. Okay, so the first kind of scale that we're going to talk about is just when geographers say scale, they're generally referring to something called scale of inquiry. So essentially what they're referring to is, you're going to look at something. And I have a bunch of maps that we're going to look at momentarily, but you're going to look at some sort of phenomenon. And you, as the geographer, have to decide at what scale do you want to look at this phenomenon. So do you want to look globally? Are you trying to compare countries or regions to one another? Maybe you just want to look at something from a regional perspective. So maybe it's just like a North America, Canada, the United States, and Mexico map. Do you want to go, this is tricky too, a national level? So this would be the country level, but in political geography, we don't refer to countries as countries. We refer to them as state, which is why you see state, country, national. These three words are interchangeable, and they kind of change sort of meaning a little bit depending on what unit we're in. But for unit 1, they're all kind of the same. Substate would be, for us, as an example, substate is below the state, below the national level. So you might be looking at a map at just the state level. So we're looking at what's going on here in Illinois. County, so you can break up the state of Illinois into counties and get a little bit more detail on what's happening in those counties. City or local, so again, St. Charles, Batavia. And then the smallest scale that you might look at is a census tract, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute. It's like a neighborhood, basically. And so again, when you're talking about just general scale, we're just talking about inquiry. So like, how do we want to study this phenomenon? And it's this idea of zooming in and out. Now, on the next slide, we're going to talk about that zoom in a little bit more detail. So this is very counterintuitive to students. They think small scale, small map. But that's not what small scale is. Small scale map is actually a map that shows a large area. So the easiest way to remember what a small scale map is to think about the detail. Small scale maps show less detail because they're zoomed out and they show more area. So you're not getting, like, if you're looking at a global map, you're not getting the street perspective on a global map. So there's not as much detail. When you increase the size of when you decrease the area, you're actually increasing the scale of the map. So large scale maps show a smaller area, but they show a lot of data on the area. This is a horrible picture. I don't even know why it's like so grainy right now. But if we're looking at scale, so the largest scale here would be your national map, and now you're looking at this region. So then the scale is getting a little bit larger. And then I can't even tell what this is. This is just Georgia, maybe. It looks like just Georgia. And then you're getting like Atlanta. So this would be Atlanta, and this would be the largest scale of the maps because you're getting the most details. So you're getting a lot of the highways that are going in and out of Atlanta. For you math people, small scale maps have smaller fractions. If that helps you remember, large scale maps have larger fractions. I'm not a math person, so I just kind of like, well, I kind of do what I did. I kind of do what I'm about to ask you to do. So I want you to pause the video. And so this is where you're going to take a couple notes for me. But before you take notes, I want you to repeat this phrase 5 times. And I'm not joking. I want you to say it out loud 5 times. I know that sounds cheesy, but if you hear yourself say it, one of these days you're going to be like, oh, I remember when Truex made me do this dumb thing, like repeat a sentence. But I want you to say small scale means less detail. Large scale means more detail, right? Small scale, zoomed out. Large scale, zoomed in. You don't have to say the zoom part, just that next part. And then you just learned about our first scale of inquiry. So I want you to describe the scale in your own words. And then I want you to refresh your memories because you also learned about something called map scale from the reading. So I want you to jot down what map scale is too. Okay, so go ahead and pause and do both of these. And if you don't remember what map scale is, go ahead and check your notes. You actually already read this section of the text in the David Palmer book. Okay, now for scale of analysis. So you have scale of inquiry. I want to study this on a global scale. Now you have to decide how you want to aggregate your data. And that's what scale of analysis is. So scale of analysis is the level at which data is displayed on a map. So you can see scale of analysis from a global, regional, national, or local perspective. But in reality, you're actually not going to see too many maps that have the scale of analysis as global, because then the data would look like this. The data wouldn't be aggregated. It would just be like one big black map, because that's what scale of analysis is. And so the way to be successful when you're being asked to consider scale of analysis is to consider how the information or how the data is being grouped. That's the key to understanding. Now, there's some conversations in the AP community that perhaps the best example of global scale of analysis might be something like a global weather map. So I'm going to pull this up and so you can see what I'm talking about here. It's actually kind of a really cool map. I spent like a lot of time just kind of looking at it. So this comes from, well, you can research on your own, not going to take too much time. But now you're looking at like, this is a weather patterns map, and you can actually see this is kind of interesting here. You guys probably know what the swirling means right here is that there's a hurricane somewhere in Southeast Asia. You can look at some of the weather patterns that are up here. And then let's kind of look at and see what's happening. And this is updated daily, so you can kind of see what's happening over here in our neck of the world. I'll just give you a minute to take a look at that. So something like this might actually be global because you're looking at the global weather patterns. And so maybe that's the only example where you're going to see global scale of analysis. But we see global scale like all the time. So I want you to pause again this video, and I want you to, in your own words, what is the difference between scale of inquiry, and scale of analysis? Oops. Actually, I want to make that big. Okay. So, thing is loading a lit. So let's see this in practice. And then we're going to talk about that second learning target, where basically that second learning target was, how does your understanding of a phenomenon change if you change the scale of analysis on the map? So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here's an example of a map. It's a global map. This map is the share of the population living in extreme poverty in 2017. So the scale of the map is global, so we're seeing the whole world, but the level of analysis, the scale of analysis is national. Why is it national? Because you can see what's happening in each country. So each country is shaded. Bonus points if you guys remember what kind of map this is, right? So it's a thematic map, kind of thematic map. So you're comparing countries. So again, the scale of analysis is at the national or country or state level. All those three are the same, and the scale of the map is global. All right, so watch what happens. So when we look at this map, and then I'm going to put them side by side. So another example, this scale of this map is national, but the scale of analysis is state, or they call it sub-state. Oh gosh, you guys, it's so confusing. It's state. When we get to the political unit, I will endeavor to confuse you further. But for now, this is state in terms of level of analysis. Now, I don't know if you remember the last map, but I want to put them side by side, and we're going to have a little chat about how when you change scale, you change your understanding of a phenomenon. So here we're talking about percentage people in poverty, right? That is the topic of both of these maps. That is the phenomenon that is being um, identified in these maps. And if you look here at the United States, I mean, we're doing pretty good, right? I mean, like global poverty is actually down worldwide, and most countries are doing okay, right? I mean, you have some areas in Africa, of course, which should come as no surprise when we talked about the whole development divide between the North and the South hemispheres. But if you're looking at the United States, we're talking about poverty rate here, somewhere between 0 and 5%, which is low, but that's a national average. If we take the scale and change it, so we take the scale from global and we look at national, and now we change the scale of analysis from national to state, you look at the United States and there's a little bit of a different story going on, right? So there are some states that are doing very good, like less than 10%, right? And that's like the lightest color blue that you can see on here, right? And so some states are doing really well, but there are some states that are not doing so well. When you have states like Alabama and Mississippi and Arkansas and New Mexico, and my neighbor's dog is a huge, big, fat jerk, so he may actually bark for a little while. I hope he stops soon. When you see 16% or more, now if you look and we compare this, the share of the population living in extreme poverty in the world, 10 to 20% brings us to some of those African countries, right? So South Africa, Namibia, Mauritania is over here. And it says 16% or more. So if we get past that 20% mark, now we're talking about some parts of the United States where people live in the same amount of poverty as people in Ethiopia do. So that changes how we look at the United States just a little bit. We can go even further and we can look at the same phenomenon, again, poverty, but now we can look at it from the county level. So, same scale, national, but now we're doing county level of analysis, and then you get even more details. So, those same states that we were just looking at before, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, you might look, hey, the whole state isn't in poverty, but there are some areas of the state of Alabama where there's 30% or more of the population living in poverty, right? So, like 30%. Now, if we go back here and you look here, we're over, you can see that, like, now we're talking about rates that are as much as, like, I don't know, it's hard to tell on this map, maybe India in some cases. So you can see that, like, when you change the scale of analysis, you get more details about what it is that you might want to study, right? So, like, you go from kind of a general, all right, well, it's an average, to like, oh, really specific. There's certain counties in these areas, in these states, that are like really poor. And then you can make decisions as politicians or as, grassroots organizations to help or target specific communities that might need more support, particularly when it comes to poverty in this case, because that's what we're studying. And again, just worth a mention here that the smallest scale and the smallest scale of analysis is the census tract. And again, think of the census tract as what's happening in a particular neighborhood, the tiniest you can get. And then finally, worth a mention here is regional scale of analysis, because sometimes this is challenging for students. And so if you see, say, a map like this one here, where you're looking at, I mean, the scale itself would be, I don't know, continent. You can look at this in a few different ways. It is regional, but it's also regional scale of analysis. So if you're looking at like a map and you see like a bunch of countries and they're all sort of shaded in the same color, or you don't see, and this is maybe even a better way to look at it, if you see like the continent of Africa and the vast majority of the countries are not identified, but only certain countries are, then you're probably looking at regional scale. So like when you chunk a bunch of areas together, that would be regional scale of analysis. And again, we're going to like practice this, so you will see this more clearly over the next time we meet, I guess. And I think that is it. So scale is going to take some practice. If you have questions, jot them down. Otherwise, that is it. Not as long as I thought. Assuming I can get this to stop.